going to be how to plot your fantasy novel. And I'm specifying fantasy because that's the genre in which I've written a book. But this works for other, like, kind of more out there genres. Like, I'm sure it also works for dystopian, and to an extent, I'm sure it also works for sci-fi, because those fantasy, dystopian, and sci-fi in particular have to do with a lot of world building. And so the planning that goes into those is more kind of in-depth and involved than if you're writing like a contemporary novel or like a rom-com or something. But specifically, I'm going to talk about planning today in the event of like planning a fantasy novel, because that's what I know how to do. And we're going to go through the entire process. Obviously, it's not going to be super long. Like, I'm hoping this video isn't super long, but if it is, then I hope it's helpful at least. Because I know that if you're not like a natural planner, it can be really hard to, like, once you get an idea, to put the idea on paper, because you don't really know how to go about fleshing out your story. But I am a heavy plotter, and I plan everything before I even like start writing the first chapter. So yeah, that doesn't mean my plan can't change like halfway through the story, but I do like to have everything planned out first before I start writing. And that's me. If you don't like doing that, that's fine. But if you don't want to do that, then that's fine. You don't have to watch this video. But if you're someone who's noticed that you have a like you get writer's block often because you aren't a plotter and you have a hard time figuring out where you want your story to go next, maybe watch this video, because it could help you at least a little bit. Even if you don't do everything that I say, you could like do one part of what I say, because that might be what you think will help you. So yeah, let's get into it. So for this video, I'm going to go through all of the kind of processes I go through when I plot. Other people might do it differently, but this is what I do as somebody who really likes to plan out a story. And you don't have to do all of this, obviously. You don't have to do really any of this if you're not the type of person that this helps you. But just a little disclaimer, this is what I do. You don't have to do all of this. If you want to do all of this, feel free to watch this entire video. But yeah, so let's get into the first thing that I do in my plotting process, which is just a super rough brainstorm. Now, when I say brainstorm, I really mean more like a brain dump, because the first thing you do in a novel plotting process is come up with your idea for the story. And then the second thing you do is think about all of the things that you could add into that story to like actually write it. So that's what I'm talking about, taking all of the ideas that you get when you get your initial idea and writing them down, whether it's in a notebook or in an online document. You have to write it all down in this brain dump. So that's what this is on my screen. And I do plan on writing this someday, but it's like a wayside work in progress that won't come out for at least 5 years, because I want to publish my trilogy first. But so I'll blur parts that are like spoilers, but this is my brain dump kind of section of this document that I planned. This is everything that I kind of pictured in my head when I first came up with this idea, and I wrote all of it down. So you can see here that I thought of a Snow Queen retelling, and because I'm a Christian, I thought about maybe adding like Christian themes that were allegorical. Don't know if I'm actually gonna like, I don't know how I would execute that yet, but I don't really need to think about it right now either because I'm not focusing on this story. But yeah, so I wrote down, I usually do this a lot. When I come up with a story idea, I write like a bunch of things with question marks because I'm like, this might be a good idea, this is what I'm thinking in my head, but I don't know if it'll actually turn out well, but I write it down just in case. And so that was like, this section right here was like the main thing that I thought of first. And then I got ideas for characters, and as you can see, it's a small cast. Because of what the story is. It's very, very character focused in my head. And the plot really is kind of these two characters overcoming internal struggles. That's the real main plot, and then the secondary plot is what actually happens in the story that causes them to overcome these internal struggles. I like character-driven stories. So yes, small cast. And then you can see this actually is what I want the first line of the story to be. And I do things like that when I brainstorm. If I think of a line, I write it down, and then I write like what kind of part in the book it would be or whatever. This, I knew it would be the first line because you can kind of tell based on reading it. And then I went here and I wrote down like components that I wanted to add. I wouldn't necessarily say, I mean, like, they are tropes technically, but I don't want them to be like just this, but I wrote them down because this is how you come up with like scenes for your story and like themes and everything. So this is like, this highlighted stuff is like components in the story, tropes, all of that good stuff. And then I went into writing everything that I thought the story could be. Yeah. And then I got ideas for characters, and these are the two leads. And I wrote all of it down. And yes, so then I wrote down another trope. This is a I guess trope that I've wanted to use in a book for a while, but the series I'm writing right now doesn't make sense for it. But I've wanted to do something like this for a long while. But yeah, and then as you can see, more just kind of brain dump and thinking and everything, and then I get into like what symbols I could use. And that's where the brain dump ends. So literally, when I say write down everything that comes to your brain initially before you start like planning out like the different, like the actual book, like in chronological order and everything, write down literally everything that comes into your brain until you don't have any more new ideas showing up. Yes, so that's the first thing. The second thing I would recommend is coming up with your characters. Now here I have two, this is in Readsy now, but I make character profiles for my characters, and I think that it's very helpful because it helps you understand a character more, because I think often if you don't plan out a character first, you can go into writing not really like knowing how to write the character because you haven't thought about them in depth yet. And so I like to think about them really in depth before I start writing. So this is my kind of outline for character planning. And as you can see, I haven't finished yet because I had been writing this story, but then I was like, no, I need to not, because I have to focus on my main project, which is my trilogy that I'm working on. But as you can see, so there's different sections. I start off like over here, there's a picture of the character, and then I like writing like a short description of their character traits up here, just to get an overall feel of the character, and then you go more in depth down here. You write personal stuff, so like literally like name, what they're often called, birthday, age, just super basic stuff, just to like as a whole for the character, like they're very base kind of things. And then it goes into traits, so you've got positive, neutral, and negative traits, and then physical traits, so like what they look like. Obviously things like ethnicity, hair color, eye color, weight, body, whatever, if that's important. You don't have to come up with that if it's not important, but if things like height are ever gonna be mentioned, you should probably like think about that, and write it down somewhere so that you can be consistent with it. So yeah, so traits are both like character traits, like personality traits, but also physical traits, as in what they look like, how they present themselves, all of those things. And then we have the mental section, which is where you really deep dive into who they are. So like what are their tendencies, what's their mood often like, what's their, it says here, temperament, temptations, what kind of person are they? Are they an optimist, pessimist, or a realist? Yeah, and then if you want, you can take a MBTI quiz for them. I haven't yet for this character, but if that's something that you're into or something you think would help you, because sometimes like if you do, I know the 16 personalities test is not commonly known as like the best test, but it does give you, if you take the test, it does give you like a list of traits that you can then be like, oh hey, that would be fun to have my character be like that, or that's a good idea, or whatever, because it tells you what traits they would have for corresponding to the type of person they are. So if you're having trouble coming up with things for this, specifically these 3 sections up here, then I do recommend taking that quiz and answering for your character. Don't answer with what you would do in the scenario, obviously. Think about what your character might do based on what you think you know of them. So yeah. And then we move on to likes and dislikes up here, and that's just super basic. Like, what does your character like to do? What do they not like to do? And what are some hobbies they have, like, of any kind. And obviously you can write things that won't show up in the story, just if it helps you think about the character in a more like rounded way, like if it helps you think about them as a real person. But obviously you can put like one thing for each of these that will be like in your story. It really doesn't have to be, you don't have to list 15 things that they like. You don't have to list like so many things. Just list a couple things that would be integral to the story that you're writing. And then we move on to interpersonal, which is like their relationships with the other characters in the story. So we've got immediate family, so like their parents, if they have siblings, maybe if they have extended family that are characters, you can write about those. And you can flesh out those relationships in this section however much you want. Like if you want to just say the name of their parent or something, you can do that. Or if you want to like flesh out their entire kind of relationship with their parent, then you can do that as well. And that goes for any of the sections here. yeah, so that it's all like, it can be as in depth or not in depth as you want it to be. Um, and then just some other like miscellaneous information. You can come up with a happiest memory, a saddest. Memories are a big part of the way my characters make decisions and do things like literally do anything in the story. So I thought about how that's important, and I was like, maybe I should like add something to my character sheets where they have a happiest, a saddest, and a memory that shaped them as a person. Um, because I think that in real life, our pasts shape who we become. So when fleshing out a character and really trying to understand who they are, it's important to like know where your character came from so that you can then apply that to how they make decisions as the story progresses. So that is something that I would recommend. Obviously, again, you don't have to, but this is actually a part that I would recommend more than most of what's on here, just because of how much it helps you understand your character. So yeah, so the second thing you're going to want to do is flesh out your characters. And this is how I do that. And obviously this is an incomplete one, but it tells you everything that I would put in here. Okay, let's go back to this Google document. Now we're going to get into a part that might have some spoilers, so I'll blur things. But then, after you flesh out your characters, that's when you can get into plot structure. And so you can pick whatever structure you want. You can do like 3 acts, you can do the 7-act structure, you can do literally any one you want, depending on what kind of story you're trying to tell. But pick one, and there's a lot of outlines on the internet and whatever. My favorite is the one that I used here, and I'll insert the image of the structure without anything that I've added to it. I'll put a picture on the screen right now so you can take a look at it, and possibly screenshot it if you like it. But this is the structure that I feel suits my stories the best, just because of the way that I think about stories and the way that I want a story to unfold. So that's the one that I have used here. So as you can see, it has 3 acts, but they also have 3 blocks within each act. And then each block has 3 sections. So, yeah, so in this first block in Act 1, we've got Introduction, Inciting Incident, and Immediate Fallout. Which is really, all 3 of those things, they don't have to be necessarily in this order, because the beginning of a book is really kind of, there's no right way to write the beginning of a book, because it's entirely dependent on how the rest of the story will unfold. So yeah, you can share as much as you want in the first part of your book, or you can share as little as you want, as long as it's engaging to the audience, and gets the story going in a way that entices a reader to continue the story. And then we've got block 2. So we've got reaction, action, and consequences. Specifically, reaction is in relation to the inciting incident. So what is this character's reaction to the inciting incident? And often I think the reaction and the immediate fallout can kind of be intertwined kind of at the same time, because I think depending on who your character is and how they would react in this situation, I think the fallout can either be from the character's reaction to the inciting incident, or the fallout can be from the inciting incident and then your character reacts to the fallout from the incident. So whatever works for you. And then action and consequences are clearly like how they take action from the inciting incident and then the consequences of those actions. And then in block three, excuse me, in block 3 we have pressure, plot twist, and push into act 2, which is really just like preparing the story to like really get going. Like we're getting into the like kind of meat and potatoes of the story, kind of. And I know it says plot twist here, but it doesn't have to be like an actual plot twist. You know, it doesn't have to be something completely like unexpected. It just has to be something new, like another incident almost. Just like a new event that pushes the story more. And then push into act 2, super easy, just like what's between this new event that's happened and you're then at the point where the story like truly kind of starts. Because act 1 is usually a lot of build up, it's usually a lot of world building, and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, so what gets the story to the point where it's like the plot is plotting. And then we've got in act 2, starting out we have new world, fun and games, and juxtaposition. New world doesn't literally have to be a new world, like your character doesn't have to go anywhere new, but new world is more in reference to like how has their life changed since the inciting incident. And that's what this new world section is really going to be about. And then fun and games is kind of like exactly what it sounds like. It's really just like a moment. It can be a moment for reflection in a time of like peace or whatever, or like a waiting period, depending on what your story is. And then juxtaposition is kind of, it's like an internal conflict within a character. Like they can be struggling to make a decision between two things, or they can, it can be any kind of struggle. It can be however it works for you. But yeah, so juxtaposition is the next part. Then we've got build up, midpoint, and reversal. So build up is obviously the build up from everything that's happened at the beginning of your story to then what pushes it to the midpoint of the story, where you can then start working up to your climax and then obviously falling action and whatever. Your build up section is going to have a lot of tension, whether it's plot tension or character tension, and it's probably going to have a lot of like questions that aren't being answered. So yeah, that's your build up section. Midpoint, I'm sure everyone watching this knows what a midpoint is. It's kind of the point of no return in a story, because it's like this is when your character has made the decision that will then drive the rest of the story. A midpoint usually always has to do with a decision on a character's part or a group of characters' part. But yeah, it's also however it works for your story. And then reversal, kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's setbacks. What is stopping the characters from achieving their end goal? And then in this next block, we have reaction, trials, and dedication. So reaction is reaction to the reversal that I just talked about. So how do they combat that? How do they deal with it? And then trials, I specifically put raising the stakes because that is what happens when you're getting into this second half of your story. The stakes are raised and they're forced to make hard decisions. They're forced to do things that make them uncomfortable. all of those kinds of things. So make sure you raise the stakes, because even if your story is not super, like, even if it's not, even if there's not a lot of stakes, raising the stakes in any way, even if it's like related to like a character relationship, make it so that something is difficult to overcome, or make it so that your character thinks that achieving their goal is very important and there's something that's keeping them away from it. And then dedication is kind of where your characters decide, like, I'm willing to go through whatever it takes to get to this end goal. And then we get into Act 3, which is probably going to be the most, like, action-packed part of your novel, even if it's not actually action in the literal sense. So we've got Calm Before the Storm, Plot Twist, and Darkest Moment. Calm Before the Storm is really self-explanatory. It's another moment of peace before something super crazy happens, which is the plot twist. And this is where an actual plot twist would be nice, where characters find something out that they didn't know of before, and it kind of ruins their plans, which then sets them into their darkest moment, where they're like, wow, that really kind of messed up our whole plan. Like, how are we going to go about continuing on doing this? Then in our next block, we have Power Within, Action, and Converge. So, Power Within, I like that term because it's like, it really shows the internal kind of decision that a character has to come to, because they have to find that strength within themselves to overcome this darkest moment that they've just experienced. So then they have to, it's kind of this like almost awakening that a character's having, like, this is what I've wanted to do, this is the goal that we have to accomplish, and I have to find the strength within myself to get to that part. So that's what Power Within is about. And then Action is them acting on that new sense of like kind of determination, obviously. And then Converge, let me show you the definition of Converge. So the definition of Converge is tend to meet at a point, as in like a pair of lines. And in this context, it's where it can either be final confrontation of the antagonist, it can be final confrontation of the general conflict, anything like that. Final confrontation of a character's internal struggle. Whatever final confrontation means in the context of your story. And then we've got the climax, where obviously everyone in here watching this knows what a climax is. And it's just it's kind of the most important part of a story, in the sense that this is what people will remember when they think about your book later. This is what people will, this is when people will decide if your book is good or not. Because what happens in the climax makes everything that you've said so far either make sense or feel super unnecessary. So write your climaxes carefully. And then resolution. And your book, it says resolution, but there doesn't have to be a resolution. Like, your book doesn't have to end happy. In this context, resolution simply means, like, how does your story end? So yeah. That's what plot structure is gonna look like. If you decide to use this outline for your plot structure, you don't have to, but that's what I do. And there's elements in there that are going to be in every plot structure, so in a sense this is kind kind of universal in the way that there's still going to be elements in this that you use even if you decide to go with a different structure. So yeah. The final thing that you're going to do in your planning section of writing your book is going to be, well, you don't have to do this. By no means do you have to do this. If you have the plot structure, you really don't have to do this. I just like to do this because this is the way that my brain works. But I plan every chapter. Here, I'll show you in something different. I literally write chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and I write what I want to be in each of those chapters, because the plot structure part of this that I just explained does tell you like all the important events of your story, but there are going to be like in between things that don't really fit into any of those sections, which is why I like to plan each individual chapter, even if I end up cutting one out or adding some later, because it's what helps me really truly feel ready to write the story, because it helps me be able to foreshadow, it helps me be able to give subtle hints here and there, like I feel like it really helps me like finally truly know what I want the story to unfold as. So yeah, that's what I do last, and I literally plan out every single chapter. Sometimes I write just like a descriptive sentence, because sometimes the chapter's only one scene, but sometimes there's a bit of a paragraph for chapter description. But yeah, it can be to whatever extent you like to do it in, or you really don't have to do this part at all. This is like a very me being a chronic plotter thing. So yeah, I think that's all for like the serious technical stuff. There's also a couple other things I recommend that are slightly less serious. There's 2 other things that I also recommend that are a little bit less serious than what I've just talked about, because all of that is stuff that if you want to become a plotter, you probably should do. But if you want just like super basic planning, these are 2 things I recommend. The first one is making a Pinterest board, because even if you're not going to write down all of your ideas, it can be super helpful to have pictures to reference when you're writing, because a picture can help you think of a scene. So as you can see for this one, this is for the same story that I've showed you for everything else. I have each of these different sections. So I have setting, inspiration, and it's literally just like obviously pictures of what a setting could look like. How, like, these are pictures that will help me then describe a setting later when I'm writing the book, because you can look at these and see like, okay, so this is where the characters are in this scene, so maybe I can use this as a reference point, describe things I'm seeing in a picture. And then I have 2 sections for characters, because these are my 2 main characters. I'm not going to go into them because especially this one is a spoiler. And then I've got a symbols section. This one is kind of specific to this story, because this story is something that I want to have a lot of symbols in it, just because I want it to be kind of allegorical. So I have a picture of symbols that I want to use, and I'm not going to say anything about this, but you can do this if you want. And then I have a clothes section, obviously. How can you not? And then I have quotes that like remind me of the vibe of the book. Obviously I can't put these in the book. Don't take quotes from Pinterest and put them in your book. That's plagiarism. But just general quotes that make me think of my book, so that I can then write things like similar to these in a way later. And then I have like a miscellaneous section where it's just kind of general things that remind me of the story, in just kind of like in aesthetic. So there's that. And then make a playlist. So here's mine. Again, yeah, so this is you, and just add literally every song that makes you think of the story. I used to think that you should like have specific ones for specific things, but I think oftentimes if you think of a song and it relates to your story, it'll relate to multiple aspects of the story and not just like a specific character. Sometimes there will be those songs that's like, this is totally this character, but in a general sense, I think just like add every song that makes you think of this character, of this story that you're writing. So yeah, this is mine. Just a little sneak peek. So yeah, that's gonna be everything I think that I have to say about this, and I hope this was helpful. If there's anything else that has to do with plotting that you want my advice on, especially as someone who plots all of her stories to a very grand extent, you can comment things that you want help on, comment questions. If it's a simple question, I'll maybe answer it in the comments, but if it's something bigger, I might make an Instagram post about it or a reel or something. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I really hope this was helpful, and I will see you next Saturday. Bye!